person. And when there's a policy or a country that makes you unknown, it's a horrible feeling, because I know. I was in prison, I was living in barrios, I was living on the streets. I know what the label of unknown person is, and that's the most excruciating pain in the psyche and heart and soul that a person can endure. And when you give them one opportunity to look in the mirror as a known person, you see the smile return, and you see the faith and the belief return that they too can have a house, can have a family, can have what we consider to be the necessities of a human life. Mm-hmm. It's a known person.
And that starts with having a voice.
Yes.
Okay.
It starts with the permission to step in and speak and have the rest of the people listen.
Well, that's very well put. I wonder if you would talk a bit about the nuts and bolts of the situation, the U.S. Immigration Service. Okay, this is such a controversial area. On the one hand, some of these people are definitely here illegally, and you could say the Immigration Service is doing its job in dealing with people who are breaking the law. On the other hand, so much of what we associate with la migra, the Immigration Service, seems brutal and excessive and unreasonable. Could you, maybe Mark, beginning with you, tell us your thoughts on what can be done about this? How can this difficulty about enforcing the law with people who are trying to make a living, how can this be worked out?
Well, I don't think we ought to enforce the law. I think we need to change it.
Okay.
The fact is, the reason, let me give you an example of what happens in Kennett Square. One of the people I interviewed works in 85% of the workers in the mushroom industry in Kennett Square are undocumented. And everybody knows that. In one farm where there are 100 workers, 85 are undocumented, in this particular farm, in fact. And the Labor Department comes and inspects on a regular basis. Well, the day before they inspect, they call the owner and say, we're going to be out there tomorrow. That's a signal for the owner to tell the 85 people who are not documented to go home. Mm-hmm. So they go through the papers and they say, okay, everything's fine, your papers are... And the reason they do that is they know that if they deported all the people who work there, as 80% of the 3 million migrant farm workers who pick our lettuce and our tomatoes and grow our crops, if we deported them, we would not have a labor force who would do that work for working minimum wage. And agriculture is one of the few industries where there's no overtime. So you work 80 hours a week, you don't get overtime. In awful living and working conditions. There are not people in this country, or very few, who will do that work. So we are dependent on their labor. And at the same time, we charge them taxes because they have fake documents. So we charge them taxes, we take out taxes that they never get back in any kind of way in terms of Social Security and that kind of thing. And we take advantage of them. They don't have nearly as many rights as most workers. So I think we need to change the law to acknowledge the fact that we need labor of Mexicans, and they certainly need our labor. I mean, our work in terms of being able to make a living and live out the same dream that we all want to work. So I think what we need to do is change the law to allow for those people to come here, work legally, and bring their families as well.
By the same token, you say in the book that as much as $15 billion goes back to Mexico. So in a sense, there is this symbiosis between the United States and Mexico, where that money supports that economy as well. I mean, how do you unravel that sort of knot of mutual reliance? Or do you see it as something that just simply needs to be resolved through the legalization of these immigrants?
Well, see, I think the fact that it is a mutual interdependence makes it possible to think about, if we legalize migrants who come here, then everybody wins. Because we certainly have something to gain here from the labor of Mexicans, and Mexicans have a lot to gain from being able to work in this country.
Also, can I add to that?
Sure.
Okay. Now, what the United States government is offering as a model is, if you haven't, the criteria is if you haven't gone through the way we want you to go through to attain your citizenship, then you're not valid. If we're going to use that model, and if that's the standing model, then Mexicans are Native Americans to this continent. So Mexicans, in turn, would have the right to question every American today according to their model. If we're going to use the inimical model of making a person prove their worthiness by the standards of this administration, if we were to use that, we would constantly have a border that's dividing and not a border that's bringing together.
Right.
That's the problem. So, but what the Mexicans did when the Americans and the blacks and the Polish and the Europeans and everybody came, everybody in this place, in Philadelphia, everybody had to have the tacit permission of the Native American Mexicans to come. And so the tacit understanding was that they can come to America, they can come here and they can work if they're willing to contribute. Somewhere along the line, that became warped into, this is my country. And the true Native Americans, who were the Mexicans, Native Americans from the Mayas, the Aztecas, the Incas, Mexicas, you can go all down the road, all the way down to the Codices. They tell you that in the old books, right? Okay, so I refuse to accept that model because it creates enemies. I don't want all these people in Philadelphia my enemy. I don't want them to pay me back rent. If they were having to pay me back rent, I'm not walking around asking every single person, show me your green card. You came from where? France, Germany, Spain. Show me your cards. And how long have you stayed here? If we were to do that, that whole suspicious thing wouldn't create community. It would create division among everybody. So in fact, what we have to do is get rid of the IU mentality and talk about we.
Yeah.
We. Now, how do we solve this? And this is a problem. Everything in this room here was created by an immigrant that came to this country and contributed creatively to it. They made the chairs, they created these rugs, they brought with them the culture from Europe. And that's what the integral and the inherent identity of America was these people are coming with their creativity. And they're creating these. We as Mexicans have dances, a beautiful language, incredible poetry, unbelievable
and some
novels.
of that is in this book.
Yes,
yeah.
We have music, we have this vast culture. And yet, to pigeonhole us as just people who are working and afraid that the INS is going to pick us up, what you're basically doing is saying, let America die. We will turn away the creativity now. We're going to give it the brain drain. So what we have now, let's not let the Asian people in to work the computers. Let the computer industry die in this country, and let's just take everything to them.
Yeah.
So I refuse to do that. I want to have Mexican dancers here and Mexican singers and Mexican poets because it's going to add to the great, beautiful tapestry of American culture.
Right. I think, unfortunately, the dialogue has not been framed in those terms. The notion
of
creativity and the contribution, the creative contribution that's being made.
There you go.
Yeah.
And these people are so busy working that it took Mark and Steve and a bunch of other people to actually generate this interest and enthusiasm for the book. And look what we have.
That's wonderful. I want to talk about language, since you are a writer. You're both writers.
Both writers, yeah.
The whole notion of bilingual education, which is such a vexed subject in this country and has been. Tell us your thoughts on that, especially now that the Latino population is larger now than the African American population in this country. What do you think about this whole business of whether there should be a national language, whether English should be the language, or whether we should be teaching Spanish in the schools? Do you have thoughts on this? Because I think it's related to the subject at hand. Mark?
I think there should be bilingual education, and I think that Anglos should learn Spanish as well as Mexicans and other Latinos should learn English. I think that both languages are incredibly rich and they really do reflect the soul of the people. I mean, the book, one of our goals in the book was that in our translation we really did keep the tone and the sense of poetry and the sense of concrete vision, keep reflecting that in the language. And both cultures and languages are really reflected the cultures are reflected in their language. And I think that given the fact that so many of the people in our communities now are Latinos, that it's really important for us to learn to expand our worldview by learning their language, as well as provide opportunities for Latinos to learn. Everybody I talked to in this book, one of their dreams was to learn English.
Yeah.
And their kids are finally doing that. What every adult who came here and has worked and has finally got their family here, finally has their kids in schools, said, I don't have time. But several people said, one of my regrets is I never learned English, but I'm too tired to come home and do that. But I tell my children, you have to learn English because it's a window to a bigger world, both in terms of opportunity and to a larger culture. I want to say the same thing to my children about learning Spanish.
Uh-huh. Well, that's well put. Jimmy,
I want
you
to follow up
Yeah.
right where Mark left off and just sort of take up his idea. Metaphysically speaking, I mean, everybody knows the basics of language. If you don't let somebody communicate, people are always going to find a way to communicate, either violently, destructively. The worst thing that you can have is that you can tell somebody, if you can't speak your language, what you're telling the person is, we refuse to recognize that you're alive. We refuse to recognize that you have any parents, that you came from a womb. You are not a human being because we refuse to let you speak your language. That's a horrible thing to impose on somebody. But the interesting thing about that is this, is that if you indulge in the beauty of language and you can create it, language is not a dead thing. When you look at the Yiddish, look at the Israeli language, it's not spoken on the streets. When you let a language, when you quit speaking it, it becomes, it joins the classic languages at the university and becomes a language to learn in classrooms. That's not what English and Spanish are. English and Spanish are an amazing tango dance. And one's swirling the other, and the other one's swirling the other, and they're coming up with these beautiful dualistic moves that express our experience. Express our experience. If we can't express our experience, we're a culture that's going to die.
Well, you're speaking as a poet. But
Sí, pero yo te puedo hablar en español también.
No.
Huh? I can speak to you.
Yeah.
But let me just say one thing. No, I'm not speaking as a poet. Let me
Yeah.
say one thing. I teach little kids from Mexico to speak English. That's part of my volunteerism. Okay? And this is the one thing I've learned more than anything, is that if you allow the Mexican children to learn English like I am doing, I teach them, what I've learned more than anything else is that it allows the fire in the human being to stay lit. It's a fire, this thing that you wake up in the morning and you see how you can add something to the society. When I teach a little girl to speak English, the flame, I see the little flame in her eyes go up. She's now thinking it's possible for me to become a teacher or a governor or something. But the important thing is, I don't tell her what to be, a lawyer or this. My job, and the job of language, is to keep the flame alive, and then let the flame be driven by the breeze and the wind of that person's creativity. But you must keep the flame alive, because if language dies, then we're going to be stumbling in the darkness.
So it sounds like you're saying that the terms of this whole debate are wrong. It's not
Absolutely.
about teaching English or Spanish. It's about teaching.
This is the absurdity of that. Yeah. This is the absurdity. In California, they're having a battle over whether or not they should put the instructions of something in Spanish too. The same people that are arguing it's too expensive to put that in Spanish are the same people that will stop at a jewelry store in Paris and pick up a $500,000 ring. That's the absurdity of this argument.
So it's a lack of proper priority.
Yeah, it's costing me money to put for these children to learn English, but I can spend $500,000 on a ring in a jewelry store. And I'm like, where's the logic in that? I mean, what kind of template am I working in? What kind of world is this that I'm living in? That's what I got to change. I got to change that in order to keep the light in the children burning.
Jimmy, last question, if you don't mind, because we're a little low on time. Do you feel you speak to readers that do not have a voice, and that it is your obligation as a writer to speak to those people, whether it's the migrant workers or it's other people who, for one reason or another, have not found their own voice? Do you feel that that's your social responsibility as a writer? Do you think of yourself as a writer with a social mission?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course. That's why I'm sitting with you and not on Good Morning America.
Okay.
On Good Morning America, they want me to talk about, if I were to mention the migrant workers, it's not a topic we can talk about. We have to talk about Mexican recipes. How do you make enchiladas? I'm like, enchiladas? I mean, the school's burning.
Yeah.
That's what I want to talk about, the burning school, not the enchilada plate with Martha Stewart, I think her name is.
Yeah. Well, she's in jail now.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I should go get her autograph.
You should compare notes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's my answer. Is yes,
Yeah.
of course, it goes hand in hand with me as a writer. I work in the neighborhoods. I have literacy programs. I work with Mark. I work with Steve. These are the kind of projects that keep the light in me alive.
And that help others find their light.
Yeah, you're talking to
Yeah.
a guy with the American Book Award, the National Pulitzer in Europe, the American Book Award,